Watch Ilhan Omar's political grandstanding implode as Vice President JD Vance flips her attack on its head with a single, devastating question she couldn't answer. Ilhan Omar just told the Vice President of the United States that he pulled up the ladder on every refugee in America to the face of a man who grew up in a house where the ladder was a fire escape from a meth lab and who climbed it anyway, one rung at a time, with bloody hands and no safety net. She called him a hypocrite. He told her about the last time he said, "Thank you." The 22nd of May 2025. The floor of the United States Senate. A special joint session on immigration reform had brought the unusual sight of House members addressing the Senate chamber, rare but constitutionally permitted for matters requiring bicameral deliberation. Vice President JD Vance presided from the chair, the way every VP has since the founding, present, mostly silent, constitutionally required to be there, but not expected to speak. Ilhan Omar, representative from Minnesota's 5th District, had been invited to present the House Progressive Caucus position. She stood at the podium, headscarf perfectly arranged, voice amplified through the Senate's oak panel chamber, and instead of addressing immigration policy, she turned to face the presiding officer's chair. She looked directly at JD Vance, and she aimed. Smash that like button because you are about to watch the Vice President of the United States answer an accusation with a question so simple, so human, that the woman who attacked him couldn't find a single word to say for 10 full seconds. Vice President Vance. Omar said his name the way a prosecutor says a defendant's name, flat, loaded, already convicted. The Senate chamber shifted. Senators who had been checking phones looked up. Aides who had been whispering stopped. Because the protocol for a House member addressing the Senate is clear, you address the body, not the chair. You say, "Mr. President" or "Madam President," the institutional title. You do not look up at the presiding officer and say his name. You especially do not say it like that. Vice President Vance, you are the poster child for pulling up the ladder. Omar's voice carried the practiced rhythm of 1,000 House floor speeches, measured, cadenced, designed to make the evening news in 8-second clips. You escaped poverty, congratulations, and your first act was to slam the door on every refugee, every immigrant, every person trying to do exactly what you did. She gripped the podium with both hands, not because she was nervous. Omar was never nervous at podiums. She gripped because it made the knuckles visible, and visible knuckles meant visible conviction, and visible conviction played well on the 6 cameras pointed at her. You wrote a book about the American dream, a bestseller, made you famous, made you rich. Then you got elected and made it harder for everyone else to live that dream. You are a hypocrite in a suit, Mr. Vice President, a man who benefited from every safety net in America and then voted to cut them all. She paused. The Senate chamber had the particular silence of 100 people who all know that a line is about to be crossed, and none of them can stop it. And let's be honest about what you really are. Omar's chin lifted, the chin that had faced down Fox News panels and congressional censure votes and death threats, the chin that never dropped. You didn't pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You married into Yale. You took Peter Thiel's money. You serve a president who called your people hillbillies before he needed their votes. She let the word sit. You're not a champion of the working class. You're a prop with a sad backstory. The chamber exhaled, not gasping, more like the sound a room makes when someone says the thing that everyone knew was coming, but no one thought would actually come. On the presiding officer's dais, JD Vance sat still. Not the stillness of a man stunned, not the stillness of a man calculating a response, the stillness of a man from Middletown, Ohio, who had heard worse from his own mother on her worst nights, nights when the pills were running low and the words were running hot, and a 1 3-year-old boy learned that the loudest person in the room is almost never the strongest. He didn't shift in his chair, didn't adjust his tie, didn't reach for water. He just looked at Omar with an expression that C-SPAN Camera 3 caught in perfect focus. Not anger, not amusement, not contempt. Recognition, the quiet recognition of a man who had seen this play before. The grievance play, the "you're one of them now" play, the play that says the only authentic poor person is one who never leaves poverty. He waited until she was finished. He waited 3 more seconds after that, not for drama, but because rushing a response is the habit of people who don't trust their own words, and Vance trusted his words the way he trusted the Marines who trained him completely. Then the Vice President of the United States leaned toward his microphone. Representative Omar. His voice was quiet, Midwest quiet, the kind that doesn't compete with noise but somehow cuts through it, the way a blade doesn't have to be loud to be sharp. Thank you. I appreciate the passion. He paused. I'd like to tell you a story. Actually, I'd like to tell you 2 stories, mine and yours, because I think when we put them side by side, something interesting happens. I grew up in Middletown, Ohio, Vance said, and the way he said Middletown was the way you say a town's name when it's not just where you're from, but what you're made of, the syllables worn smooth from a lifetime of carrying them. Population, 48,000. Shrinking. Used to be a steel town. By the time I was growing up, it was a pill town. He looked at the Senate chamber, not at Omar, at the room, at the 100 senators, and the aides, and the gallery. My mother was an addict, not in the abstract way. People use that word in policy papers, substance use disorder, opioid crisis, statistics on a chart. She was an addict in the way that means a 3-year-old boy comes home from school and finds her on the bathroom floor and has to decide whether to call 911 or handle it himself, because the last time he called 911, she didn't speak to him for 2 weeks. Silence. The Senate chamber, which had buzzed with Omar's attack, went flat. I lived in. I'm going to be honest, because I wrote a book about this, so it's not a secret. I lived in a house where there were more pill bottles than food in the refrigerator, where the electricity got shut off 3 times in 1 year, where my mother had, I lost count, 14 boyfriends in 4 years, and each one was a different version of the same disaster. Vance's hands rested on the desk. Flat. Open. Not gripping. Not tense. The hands of a man who had made peace with his own history, the way you make peace with a scar. You don't hide it, and you don't show it off. You just let it be there. And then, my grandmother, Mama, she took me in. She was 60 years old. She smoked like a chimney. She kept a loaded .38 revolver under her mattress, and she saved my life. She didn't save it with a program. She didn't save it with a government check. She saved it by saying every single day, JD, you are not trash. Don't you ever let anybody tell you that you are. He paused, looked down at his hands for a moment, then back up. America gave me that. Gave me Mama. Gave me a recruiting office in Middletown where a Marine sergeant looked at a skinny kid from a meth house and said, "You'll do." Gave me the GI Bill. Gave me Ohio State. Gave me Yale Law School where, yes, Representative, I met my wife. And eventually, America gave me this chair. He looked at Omar, not confrontational, calm, almost gentle now. Let me tell your story, because it's a good story too. He leaned forward slightly. You were born in Mogadishu, 1982. Civil war broke out when you were 8. Your family fled. Not relocated, not immigrated, fled. The kind of fleeing where you leave with what you can carry, and you don't look back, because looking back means seeing the things you don't want your children to see. He spoke about her past with a specificity that surprised the chamber, not attacking, cataloging, treating her story with the same seriousness he treated his own. You spent 4 years in a refugee camp in Kenya, Dadaab, if I'm not mistaken. I've read about Dadaab. 90,000 people, no running water in most sections, one doctor for every 20,000 residents. You were a child. You didn't choose any of it. No child chooses a refugee camp, just like no child chooses a meth house. The comparison landed quiet but heavy. 2 children, 2 nightmares. Same country at the end of both. In 1995, the United States of America, this country, the one you just accused me of betraying, admitted your family as refugees. Out of every country on earth your family could have gone to, this one said yes. Resettled you in Arlington, Virginia, then Minneapolis, gave you citizenship, gave you public schooling, the same public schools you now critique, gave you the right to vote, gave you the right to run for office. And you won. Twice. You went from a refugee camp in Kenya to the United States Congress. He let that land, let the arc of it, refugee camp to Congress, sit in the chamber the way his own arc, meth house to vice presidency, had sat a moment before. 2 arcs, same shape, same country drawing them. Representative Omar. America gave us both everything, not perfect everything, not easy everything. The kind of everything that comes with struggle and failure, and days when you wonder if it's worth it. But everything. The question is, ain't what America gave us. The question is what we gave back. Omar opened her mouth, the beginning of a response, a word forming. But Vance wasn't finished, and the Senate chamber knew he wasn't finished because his voice hadn't risen. A voice that rises is a voice that's reaching for its point. A voice that stays level already has the point and is walking toward it. The 11th of September, 2001, Vance said. I was 17 years old, senior year at Middletown High School. He looked at the Senate chamber, and for a moment his eyes went somewhere that wasn't this room, somewhere that was 24 years old and still burning. I remember exactly where I was. Second period, Mrs. Patterson's English class. Someone came in and said a plane hit the World Trade Center. We went to the cafeteria where they had a TV, and we watched the second plane hit live. 17 years old. I'd never seen anything like it. None of us had. His voice stayed level. No drama, no tremor, just memory. Precise as a photograph. The next day, September 12th, 4 of my classmates went to the Marine recruiting office on Main Street in Middletown. 4. The day after 9/11. They didn't wait for the invasion. They didn't wait for the president to make a speech. They walked in on September 12th and said, "Where do I sign?" One of them, I won't use his name, never came back whole. Hes alive, Hes in Middletown. He works at a warehouse, but he left a piece of himself in Fallujah that hell never get back. Vance looked at Omar. That's how Middletown described September 11th. We enlisted. He let the sentence hang for 3 seconds. Representative Omar in 2019, at a CARE fundraiser, you described September 11th as follows. He didn't pull out a paper. He didn't need to. Everyone in the room knew the quote. Some people did something. The gallery shifted. A sound, not a gasp, not a murmur. Something between the two moved through the room like a wave through grass. 3,000 Americans died. 3,000. Firefighters who ran upstairs, they knew they wouldn't come back down. Office workers who called their families from the 90th floor to say goodbye. Passengers on Flight 93 who stormed the cockpit. My friends, kids I grew up with, kids I played football with, joined the United States Marine Corps because of that day. Vance's jaw tightened. The only physical tell had shown, a tightening at the hinge of the jaw, the kind of tightening that a man who learned emotional control in a meth house and perfected it at Paris Island does not show unless the emotion is real. And your description was something. He paused. Let the words sit in the oak-paneled chamber like a stone dropped in still water. Some people did something. Those weren't random people. Representative, they were Al-Qaeda terrorists who murdered 3,000 Americans. And it wasn't something. It was the worst attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor. My friends signed up to fight and die because of that day. Some of them did die. And you reduced it to something. Omar's chin was still up. Her posture was still perfect, but her eyes, for the first time since she'd taken the podium, moved. Not away from Vance. Down just a fraction. A fraction of a degree, the way a compass needle drifts when a magnet passes nearby. Not enough to change direction, but enough to prove the needle felt it. Let me be honest about something, Vance said, and the phrase was a signature, not a throat-clearing, but a warning label in the Vance universe. Let me be honest about something was the sound of the safety coming off. When I wrote Hillbilly Elegy, I got criticized. You know who criticized me the most? People from my own community. People from Middletown. People from Appalachia. They said id aired dirty laundry. They said id made them look bad. They said id told the world that my mother was an addict, and my family was broken, and our town was dying. He nodded slowly. And they were right. I did tell the world that. Because it was true. And I believed, I still believe, that the only way to fix a problem is to be honest about it. Not to cover it up. Not to blame the investigators. To say, this is broken. And here's how. And here's what it costs. He turned to Omar. Representative, your community, the Somali American community in Minneapolis, had a problem too. A big one. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't lean forward. Stayed exactly where he was. The posture of a man who doesn't need to move toward you because the facts are already walking in your direction. Feeding Our Future, Federal Nutrition Program. Between 2020 and 2022, over $250 million, and potentially as high as $9 billion, depending on which federal estimate you accept, was stolen. Stolen from a program designed to feed children. 75 defendants charged, the largest pandemic fraud case in American history. He let the numbers land, then added more. Let me tell you what $250 million in stolen child nutrition money looks like on the other end. It looks like a feeding site on Riverside Avenue that listed 5,000 meals served per day. Investigators visited. You know how many children were present? None. 0 children. 5,000 meals claimed. 0 mouths fed. The money went to luxury cars, real estate in Kenya and Turkey, and a $4 million property portfolio for one of the defendants. Luxury condos bought with money that was supposed to buy lunch for a 7-year-old. Vance paused. The Senate chamber was completely still. And these weren't strangers to your district. Representative. These were organizations in the 5th District. Your district. Your constituents ran these sites. Your constituents reported the fraud. And when the investigation came, when law enforcement showed up to find out why feeding sites with 0 children were billing for thousands of meals, you went on record. He looked at Omar. She looked back. Her face hadn't moved. The composure of a woman who had been through congressional censures and survived. But her right hand left the podium and dropped to her side. Not a retreat, a rebalancing. The kind of physical adjustment a person makes when the ground shifts beneath them. And what did you do, Representative, when investigators came to Minneapolis to uncover how $250 million meant for hungry children was stolen? When the FBI and DOJ opened cases, you called the investigation chaos. Your word, chaos. You didn't call the fraud chaos. You called the investigation chaos. You said the government was criminalizing community organizations, the organizations that were billing for children who didn't exist. Vance shook his head, not dramatic, just the slow headshake of a man who couldn't understand the math. When my community had problems, real problems, ugly problems, the kind you don't want on the front page, I wrote about them honestly. It cost me friendships. It cost me Thanksgivings. There are people in Middletown who still won't look at me. But I told the truth. Because the people suffering from those problems, the kids in meth houses, the families losing fathers to fentanyl, they deserved the truth more than I deserved comfort. He paused. When your community had the same kind of problem, fraud, stealing from children, you covered for it. You attacked the people trying to stop it, and the children who were supposed to be fed, they're still hungry. Omar shifted her weight, left foot to right foot. The shift of a debater recalculating position. Not retreating, but recognizing that the ground she was standing on had changed. Her aide, a young man in a gray suit 2 rows behind the podium, was writing something on a notepad fast. Not notes for her, notes for himself, because in Washington aides write 2 kinds of notes, notes that help their boss and notes that protect their own career. This was the second kind. Representative Omar, let me be honest about something else. There it was again, the safety off. The Senate chamber, which had learned the pattern, braced. I made my money writing a book, Hillbilly Elegy. I wrote it, a publisher bought it, people read it, some agreed, some hated it, but the transaction was clean. Book for money, transparent. My tax returns are public. He paused. After the book, I worked in venture capital, invested in companies. Some worked, some didn't. The salary was public, the investments were disclosed. When I ran for Senate, I filed every financial disclosure required by law. Everyone. He looked at Omar. Let's talk about your money. Representative. Omar's chin lifted higher, a fraction barely visible. But it was the tell. The Omar tell. When the chin goes up, the armor goes on. Your campaign, your official FEC-registered campaign, paid $3.7 million to the E Street Group, a consulting firm. The founder and managing partner of the E Street Group is Tim Minette. He paused. Tim Minette is your husband. The gallery didn't react. They knew. Everyone in Washington knew. But hearing it laid out on the Senate floor in Vance's flat Midwest voice was different from reading it in a Politico article. Articles are abstract. A man's voice is concrete. $3.7 million in campaign funds routed through your husband's company. The FEC filed a complaint. Your campaign amended its filings after the fact. The amended filings showed payments that the original filings didn't, which means the original filings were either wrong or incomplete. In either case, Representative, that's a problem. He let that settle, then continued. And it's not just the campaign money. Mr. Minette's other business ventures, a cannabis company, a winery venture, consulting contracts outside the campaign, have generated their own questions. $1.7 million in funds that journalists have struggled to trace from input to output. When you're married to someone whose company receives millions from your campaign and whose other businesses have unaccounted money, Representative, the word for that isn't entrepreneurship. The word is pattern. Vance didn't wait for a response. He turned a page in a thin folder, the only prop head used, a plain manila folder, no labels, no dramatic colored tabs. And then there's the immigration question, which I bring up not to be cruel but because you raised the topic of immigration in your attack on me." He looked at her. "There are credible, documented allegations, investigated by the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, reviewed by multiple federal agencies, that you married your brother, Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi, in 2009 for the purpose of immigration fraud. You've denied it, but the records that could prove or disprove it, your 2009 tax returns, you refused to release. And when Congresswoman Nancy Mace issued a subpoena for those records in 2025, you challenged it in court." He closed the folder gently. "The way you close a book you finished reading. I made my money writing about my pain. You made yours rooting campaign funds through your husband's company. I disclosed everything. You amended your filings after you got caught. That's the difference." Omar's hand, the one that had left the podium, was now at her hip, fingers curled against the fabric of her jacket. Not a fist. Not open. Something in between. The hand of a person who wants to gesture, but doesn't know what the gesture would be. Vance leaned back in the presiding officer's chair. For the first time in 20 minutes, something in his posture changed. Not harder, softer. The data knife was being put down. What came next wasn't data. It was something older. "Representative Omar, I want to tell you something personal. I hope you'll hear it." His voice dropped. Not to a whisper, but to the register a man uses when he's speaking to one person in a room full of people. The register of a conversation, not a speech. "I wake up every day grateful. Every day. Not grateful in the way politicians say they're grateful. I'm grateful for the opportunity to serve. That kind of stuff. The stuff that means nothing. I mean genuinely grateful. The kind of grateful where you lie in bed at 500 a.m., before the alarm, and you think about Mama, who's gone now, and you say, 'Thank you' out loud to a woman who can't hear you." The Senate chamber was utterly still. Not the stillness of people waiting for a punchline, the stillness of people listening to something true. "I'm grateful to the Marine sergeant who yelled at me for 16 weeks at boot camp until I stopped being a scared kid from Ohio and started being a man. I'm grateful to my wife who saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. I'm grateful to the teachers at Middletown High who didn't give up on me when my grades dropped every time my mom had a new boyfriend." He looked at Omar and his face. The face that had been calm and precise for 20 minutes showed something else. Not anger, not triumph, sadness. "I'm grateful to America. Not to an idea of America, not to a theory of America, to this actual country, with its actual flaws and its actual beauty, that took a kid from a meth house and let him become vice president. That's what I gave back gratitude. Every single day." He paused, long. "Representative Omar, the same country that took you from a refugee camp in Kenya and gave you citizenship and a seat in the United States Congress, that country, the same country that took me from a meth house and gave me the Marines and this chair, that country." He leaned toward the microphone. "When was the last time you said something genuinely kind about it?" The question landed in the Senate chamber like a bell struck in an empty church, a single clear tone that kept resonating. Not qualified, not conditional, not "America is great," but just kind. When was the last time you stood at a podium and said something kind about the country that saved your life? Omar stood at the podium. Her mouth opened, not wide, just the beginning of a word that didn't come. Because the question wasn't about policy, it wasn't about voting records, it wasn't about FEC filings or immigration fraud or $250 million stolen from children. The question was about a single word, when, and she couldn't name a time, 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4. The Senate chamber counted without counting. Every person in the room felt the seconds in their chest, the way you feel seconds when someone is supposed to speak and doesn't. Each second stretching, thickening, becoming heavier than the second before. 5 seconds. 6. 7. Omar's aide stopped writing. The notepad sat on his lap. His pen was still. 8 seconds. 9. Vance didn't fill the silence, didn't rescue her, didn't move on. He just sat in the presiding officer's chair and waited the way you wait for an answer to a question that matters. Not impatiently, not aggressively, with the patience of a man who had waited his whole life for things that mattered and had learned that waiting is not weakness. 10 seconds. Omar's chin, the chin that never dropped, didn't drop, but it stopped lifting. It found a position that was neither defiant nor defeated, a position that had no name because it was the position of a person who had been asked a simple question and found in the vast catalogue of her political career no answer. "I say it every day," Vance said softly. "I say thank you. I say it to the Marines who trained me. I say it to the teachers who believed in me. I say it to Mama, who's gone now, but who I talk to anyway. And I say it to this country." He looked at the chamber, then back at Omar. "When was the last time you said thank you, Representative? Not to your donors, not to CARE, to America, the country that saved both of us." He paused, then quieter. "Because here is what I hear from you, Representative. I hear it's all about the Benjamin's baby, about our closest ally in the Middle East. I hear dual loyalty, an accusation so old and so ugly that your own party condemned it. I hear some people did something about the worst day in our nation's modern history. I hear you describe pro-Hamas protesters who celebrate October 7th as students who are fighting for the right thing. I hear you get removed from the Foreign Affairs Committee by a bipartisan vote because your colleagues on both sides decided they couldn't trust you to represent America's interests abroad." His voice hadn't risen once, not a decibel, and that was what made it devastating. The facts were coming at room temperature, and room temperature was enough to burn. That's your record of gratitude, Representative. That's what you gave back to the country that saved your life? Benjamin's, dual loyalty, something, and an empty 10 seconds when someone asked you to say something kind. Silence. Vance waited 3 more seconds, then nodded. The nod of a man who had received his answer, and the answer was the absence of one. Vance stood slowly. The presiding officer standing at the dais is unusual. The VP typically remains seated, but this was no longer a typical session, and Vance standing wasn't a power move. It was a closing. The way a man stands at the end of a conversation that mattered. "Representative Omar, we are both children of the American dream." His voice was steady. The Midwest quiet had settled into something deeper now. Not quiet as absence, but quiet as weight. Both of us. You from a war zone, me from a meth house. 2 kids who shouldn't have made it, 2 kids who did. He looked at her. "The difference is not that I'm a Republican and you're a Democrat. I don't care about that right now. The difference is this. I know the dream is real. I lived it. I know it's imperfect. I know it doesn't work for everyone. I know there are kids right now in Middletown going through exactly what I went through, and some of them won't make it. But the dream is real. It happened to me. I am proof that it happened." His jaw tightened again. That hinge tightening. And this time he let it show, let the camera see it. Because what came next wasn't political. You've spent your career pretending the dream doesn't exist. Because if the dream is real, if America really can take a refugee from Somalia and make her a congresswoman, then your grievance narrative falls apart. If America is actually good enough to do that, then all the anger, all the some people did something, All the "it's all about the Benjamins," all of it stops working, because you can't be a victim of the country that saved you. You can only be ungrateful. Omar's eyes moved, not down this time, toward the exit. Just a glance, a flash quick enough that only the aides sitting at the angle between the podium and the door would have noticed. It was the first time in the exchange that her body had betrayed a direction, and the direction was out. She didn't move toward it, but she looked. "I'm grateful. Representative, you're angry." Vance's voice was the softest it had been all session, not condescending, not pitying, the softness of a man who recognized something in someone else that had seen in his own mother. The anger that comes from pain that never got thanked away, never got loved away, just sat there and turned into politics. And the saddest part is, we were both saved by the same country. He sat down. The gavel, which had been resting untouched for the entire exchange because no one had thought to use it, because no one had wanted to interrupt, sat on the presiding officer's desk like a prop from a play that had gone off script. The session was technically still active. The immigration reform discussion was technically still on the agenda. But everyone in the chamber knew that whatever came next, whatever amendment, whatever vote, whatever procedural motion, would be an afterthought. The session was over. Vance had ended it the way a man ends a conversation, by saying the truest thing in the room, and then sitting down. The Senate chamber did not applaud. The Senate doesn't applaud. It's against decorum, against tradition, against everything the oak panels and marble floors were built to enforce. But something happened that was louder than applause. Senators shifted in their seats, not uncomfortably, decisively. The shift of people who had just made up their minds about something they'd been undecided on. The shift of people who had watched a man answer an insult not with an insult, but with a question, and the question had been the strongest blow anyone had landed on that floor all year. Omar stood at the podium for 4 more seconds. Her papers were already in her hands. She'd begun collecting them during Vance's last paragraph, the way a student collects books before the bell rings, the body already leaving before the feet follow. She straightened the papers against the podium edge. Tap, tap, 2 taps, precise, the precision of a woman who needed her hands to do something normal because the rest of her was doing something she'd never done before, losing a confrontation without speaking a word. She walked back to the visitors' gallery entrance, back straight, headscarf in place, chin at the same angle it had been since she'd arrived. But the walk was different, not the walk of a woman who had come to the Senate to deliver a message, the walk of a woman who had come to the Senate to deliver a message and been asked a question, and the question was still hanging in the air behind her. Following her through the door, following her into the hallway, following her into the car that would take her back to the House side of the Capitol, where she would sit in her office and be asked by 17 reporters, one after another, the same question Vance had asked: when was the last time? She would not answer them either. The clip hit Twitter before Omar reached the hallway. Not the full exchange. Nobody watches 22 minutes on Twitter. The clip. The clip was 63 seconds long. It started at, "When was the last time you said something genuinely kind about it?" and ended at, "The country that saved both of us." 63 seconds. 10 seconds of silence in the middle. It was the 10 seconds that broke the internet. Number, Omar's silence, trended number 1 within 90 minutes. 28 million views in 4 hours. The clip didn't need commentary. The silence was the commentary. 10 seconds of a United States Congresswoman standing at a podium, mouth slightly open, unable to name a single time she had said something kind about the country that gave her citizenship. Fox News ran the full exchange uncut during the 800 p.m. hour. Something they almost never did, because uncut footage doesn't have the graphics and the chyrons and the four-person panels that keep viewers from changing the channel, but the producers understood that this footage didn't need graphics. The footage was the graphic. CNN's coverage was revealing. Anderson Cooper played the "When was the last time" clip and turned to his panel. The panelist on the left, a former Obama communications director, started with, "Representative Omar has repeatedly expressed," and then stopped, looked at her notes, shuffled papers. "She has expressed," she has said, and the sentence never finished because the panelist had gone looking for the quote where Omar said something kind about America, unqualified, unconditional, and the quote wasn't there. The two refugees framing became the story, not Vance versus Omar, not Republican versus Democrat. Two people saved by the same country. One said, "Thank you." One couldn't name the last time. That framing was devastating because it was immune to the standard political counterattacks. You couldn't call it racist. Vance had explicitly honored Omar's refugee story. You couldn't call it sexist. He hadn't mentioned gender once. You couldn't call it Islamophobic. He hadn't mentioned religion once. All you could call it was the truth. And the truth had sat in the Senate chamber for 10 seconds with no response. Consequences. Omar's office released a statement 3 hours after the exchange. Vice President Vance's attempt to weaponize patriotism is a dangerous distraction from the real threats facing immigrant communities. The statement used the word dangerous twice, distraction 3 times, and America 0 times. Political Twitter noticed. She had 3 hours to say something nice about America. One viral tweet read, "She used them to say dangerous and distraction instead." Vance's point proven. CARE called the exchange a dog whistle wrapped in a personal story. The response generated a second wave of viral clips. This time, Vance supporters posting the "grateful to the Marines who trained me" section alongside CAIR's statement and asking, "Which one sounds like a dog whistle to you?" The FEC complaint regarding the E Street Group payments gained new momentum. 3 senators, 2 Republican, 1 independent, co-signed a letter requesting formal review. Tim Mynette's firm suspended its contract with the Omar campaign pending review. The Mace subpoena on Omar's 2009 tax records moved to federal court in D.C., with a hearing scheduled for July. But the lasting damage wasn't legal. It was narrative. 2 refugees became a phrase. It appeared on bumper stickers, in op-eds, in Sunday sermons. It became the shorthand for a specific idea that America is not measured by the people who complain about it, but by the people who were saved by it and say so. A pastor in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a Congolese refugee who'd come to America in 1998, used 2 refugees as his sermon title the following Sunday. He told his congregation, "I know which refugee I am, do you?" The sermon was recorded on a phone, posted to YouTube, and got 4 million views. A man in Tulsa speaking to 60 people in a church basement reached more people than Omar had reached in her entire attack on Vance. A high school teacher in Dearborn, Michigan, Arab American, 20 years in the classroom, assigned the full exchange as a civics exercise. "Watch both sides," she told her students. "Then answer one question. Can you name the last time you said something kind about America?" 14 of her 22 students could. The other 8 sat quietly and thought about it. The teacher later told the Detroit Free Press, "That silence was the most productive silence I've had in 20 years of teaching." The "when was the last time" question became its own meme, but not the mocking kind, the sincere kind. People posted videos of themselves answering it: a truck driver in Laredo, a nail salon owner in Houston, a retired Marine in Jacksonville, a Somali-American nurse in Columbus, Ohio, who looked at the camera and said, "Yesterday, I said thank you yesterday when my patient survived surgery and the system worked. I said thank you to America yesterday. That clip alone got 11 million views. Tyler Boggs sat on the front steps of his duplex on Crawford Street, 3 blocks from where JD Vance grew up, 7 blocks from the Marine recruiting office where Tyler had walked in on the 12th of September, 2001. 17 years old, not old enough to sign without a parent, and not willing to wait for one. Tyler was 41 now. He worked second shift at a logistics warehouse outside Middletown, $19.40 an hour. Bad knees from Fallujah, good enough hands to stack pallets. He watched the Vance clip on his phone, not propped against anything, just held in his hand, because Tyler wasn't the kind of man who set up viewing stations. He watched things once, standing up, and then went back to work. Vance said, 4 of my classmates went to the Marine recruiting office on Main Street. Tyler paused the clip, looked up at Crawford Street. Quiet, broken sidewalk, 2 boarded houses on the corner, 1 kid on a bicycle. Same street, different decade, same town. He pressed play. Vance said, one of them never came back whole. Tyler looked at his knees, the left one, the one that had taken shrapnel in Fallujah, the one that predicted rain better than any weather app, the one that made the stairs at the warehouse a daily negotiation. The left one ached. It always ached when someone talked about Fallujah, not phantom pain, memory pain, the body remembering what the mind had filed away. JD said it right. Tyler said to no one, or to the street, or to the kid on the bicycle, or to the 4 guys from Middletown High who walked into that recruiting office in 2001, 3 of whom were still alive, and 1 of whom was Tyler, and 1 of whom wasn't. We joined because of that day. She called it something. He closed the clip, put the phone in his pocket, stood up slow because the left knee needed warning, and went inside. On the kitchen counter, next to a gas bill and a half-eaten sleeve of Ritz crackers, there was a framed photo Tyler at 18. Paris Island dress blues, grinning the grin of a kid who didn't know what Fallujah was yet, but who had walked into a recruiting office the day after 3,000 Americans died, because that's what you did in Middletown when something happened. Not something, that thing. The thing that changed everything. Tyler looked at the photo, touched the frame once, went to work. Abdi Farah wiped the counter of his convenience store on Cedar Avenue, Minneapolis, the avenue the locals called Little Mogadishu, the avenue where the signs were in English and Somali, and the shelves held both Campbell's soup and camel milk, 6:15 p.m. The after-work rush was thinning. A small TV behind the register, mounted in 2014, the same year Abdi bought the store, was playing the Vance clip. Abdi's nephew, Youssef, had pulled it up on his phone and cast it to the TV. Because Youssef was 22 and believed that everything important happened on a screen, and everything on a screen should be on a bigger screen. Vance's voice filled the small store. When was the last time you said something genuinely kind about it? Abdi stopped wiping, rag in hand, looked at the TV. He had been in America for 23 years. He had arrived in 2002. Not from a refugee camp, but from Nairobi, where had spent 6 years after fleeing Mogadishu. He had worked at a meat processing plant in Faribault for 3 years, saved $14,000, moved to Minneapolis, bought the store with an SBA loan, and 3 years of fear, 23 years. In that time, he had paid off the loan, put 2 daughters through community college, buried his father, who had made it to Minneapolis, but not to the 10th anniversary of their arrival, survived a robbery in 2017, survived COVID in 2020, survived the fraud scandal, which didn't touch his store, but touched his neighborhood's reputation, which touched everything. Abdi looked at the TV. Then he looked at the sign above the door. The sign Head had made in 2014 when the store was new, and the neighborhood was hard. and Abdi wanted everyone who walked in to know what kind of place this was. The sign was in English and Somali. It said one word, welcome. Every day, Abdi said quietly, so quietly that Yusef restocking shelves 3 feet away didn't hear. I say, thank you every day. He looked at the TV. Omar standing at the podium, 10 seconds of silence. She should try it. Yusef looked up. What? Abdi shook his head, went back to wiping the counter. The rag moved in slow circles. The same motion had been making for 11 years. The motion of a man who cleaned his own store, because the store was his, and what's yours you take care of, and what takes care of you, you say thank you to. Outside, Cedar Avenue was settling into evening. The halal butcher was closing. The tea shop was filling. A woman in a headscarf was pushing a stroller. A man in a Vikings jersey was laughing with his son. Cedar Avenue, Little Mogadishu. Doing what it had always done, being American in its own way. The way Middletown was American in its own way. The way every town that takes someone in and lets them build something is American. Abdi looked at the sign one more time. Welcome. That was his thank you, every day, right there on the door. She called him a hypocrite. He told her about Mama. She called him a prop. He told her about the 12th of September 2001. She attacked the latter. He asked her, when she last said, thank you. God bless Tyler Boggs and the 4 boys from Middletown who walked into a recruiting office the day after the world changed because something wasn't a word they used. God bless Abdi Farah and the sign that says welcome, because a man who wipes his own counter and says thank you every day taught this country more about gratitude than 1,000 speeches from a podium. 2 refugees, same country, one said thank you, one couldn't. 24 excuses from one congresswoman. 10 seconds of silence. And one question she still hasn't answered. When was the last time you said something kind about America?